McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop, Season 3, Episode 8. Mice in a Jar. October 15th, 1921. Continued. As soon as I entered the Whiskelet's cave, Noble appeared behind me. After him came Ariana, Scotland, and Octavia. We found ourselves in the same corridor that I'd entered last time. The cave walls were dark and dank. I spotted the strange staring mask in the corner. Scotland stepped forward and sniffed. "Smells like blood. Does it smell like blood to you?" "It's the mushrooms," I said. "Blood mushrooms," Scotland said. A vampire's delicacy." Ariana hugged herself and looked around. Her eyes looked a little bit wild. I couldn't tell if it was fear of the cave or a hunger for adventure. She looked a little bit like a wolf. Octavia looked like she was going to faint. "Are you all right, darling?" I asked. "Oh, you know me," she said. "I panic for the first 30 seconds, and then I'm more ferocious than any of you." Noble was the only one who seemed utterly calm. I thought that was brave of him, considering he might be about to live here. He took a few steps down the corridor and stopped in front of the mask. "Does the whole place look like this?" he said. "Just a cave?" "No," I said. "It's actually quite civilized. I'll show you. Come on." I took them down the way Wrath had taken me. I hoped to run into Wrath again. Maybe he took strolls down this corridor. Maybe we'd find him here, in the empty stone, and we wouldn't have to venture into that strangely luxurious city, into that waste of wealth and decadence. We didn't find Wrath. I led the others out of the tunnels and into Maskwell, the underground city. "It's bigger than this," I said. "It goes on, in sections. Wrath said it was as big as New York." "I sort of love it," Octavia said, as we all stood in the entrance and stared. "It's like a termite's storybook." The lights were on, thank goodness. They were yellow and welcoming, not green and ghastly, the way they were when the Whiskelets were present. I suddenly realized that the Whiskelets had designed this world to look beautiful and welcoming when they weren't present. They were like children, setting up sand castles at the beach so they could knock them down. They didn't want the beautiful lights. They wanted to destroy them. I was lost in disturbed thought when Noble put his hand on my shoulder. "Is it safe to go down there?" he said. "Yes," I said. I turned to the group. "Everyone, if the lights go out, use your murder object immediately. Ariana, stay by me, and we'll use the same one. From there, use a magic portal to get back to 1921. "If the lights go out, it means they're coming," Scotland said. "Yes," I said. "They always arrive in the dark. If the lights are green, they're already present, and you should run." "Is it possible to move from section to section and avoid them?" Noble said. "If the lights went out, couldn't you just sneak away until you found a section of the city where the lights were lit?" "In theory," I said. I felt twitchy. I didn't want Noble to sneak past those things. I was going to be worried about him being devoured by plague mask birds every second of the day. "What should we do next?" Ariana said. "We're trying to find Wrath?" "Yes," I said. I put my fist to my lips and thought. "And you said this place was as big as New York," Noble said. "Yes," I said. "We could split into groups," Noble said. "Oh," Octavia said, "please no. I'm sorry, but no. I don't want to get separated. What if something terrible happens and one group never returns and we never find out what happened?" There was a silence. "Well, when you put it that way," Noble said, attempting a grin. "We'll stick together," Ariana said. She looped her arm through Octavia's. "Is there a way to systematically search?" I stared into the distance, and I felt a bit green. Where was Wrath now? Would we never find him, but instead run into 13 plague mask creatures and know that the worst had happened? Would we find him dead? What had happened to him after I left? I'd assumed the Whiskelets would be angry at me and leave Wrath out of it. But what if they found him and questioned him about the other human who had made it into their world? What if they murdered him? What if I'd gotten Wrath into trouble because I'd been spotted? I shivered and decided that the best thing I could do was just find Wrath. That was the only place I could start. If he needed saving or medical attention, whatever had happened to him, I had to find him first. Diary, I also have to confess that I was worried about the rest of us as well, when it came to Wrath. I felt a deep sympathy for him. Every once in a while his humanity shone through, beyond his wooden puppet eye. And besides, I'd just met the real Wrath a few hours before. I knew what he was like now, before he'd gone mad. I wanted to save that man. But I also knew that that man was currently unhinged. And what was he going to do to us? He had confessed to me that he was tempted somewhat by the Whiskelets' offer. He was tempted by the idea of becoming one of these things. I did not yet know exactly what death to all mice meant, but I had my suspicion that the Whiskelets wanted humanity dead. Parts of us, anyway. They seemed like demons, things that worked in the shadows, masterminds behind something long-term. Some sort of strange, cultish plan. If the Whiskelets were here to murder or maim, then, well, I had a fear that Wrath wanted to be a part of it. The Whiskelets loved the murdering and maiming that Wrath had already done. I think the madman in Wrath loved the murdering and maiming he had done. I thought of Mora, and how the man she was engaged to had gone back in time to 1916 to inflict horrible, cackling suffering on some men he barely knew. How does misfortune do this to us? How does it just keep growing? Maud, Noble said. I broke out of my reverie. Let's go, I said. Where to? Ariana said. I stared out across the city. This was an impossible task. Wrath could be asleep in a bed in any one of these thousands of houses. The same was true of every other district of the city we found. Mathematically speaking, this was not the task of an afternoon. We have to find some way to draw him out, I said. Draw him out, Octavia said. We could open every building, and maybe we should, I said. But I think we've got to be a bit more strategic than that. Octavia said. I turned and faced them. Correct me if you think this is a terrible idea, but I think we need to exhaust every section of the city before we move on to the next one. We can see the walls of this district. We know where it ends. Before we keep walking, we need to make sure that Wrath isn't in one of these buildings. Agreed, Noble said. Easier said than done, Ariana said. I have a plan, I said. Don't laugh, all right? 5 minutes later, we walked in a group through the streets of the city. We started at the edges, and our plan was to slowly spiral inward until we'd walked past every house. We sang. Very, very loudly. We started with Old King Wenceslas, but realized we didn't know all the words, so we switched to I'm That Syncopated Boogie Boo, which is one of my favorite Halloween songs when I was younger. Octavia got a bit carried away and started gesturing. We were all laughing. I found that so funny, that we could be here in this much danger and still laugh at each other. Honestly, I felt like I was several years younger. It was so frightening to be here, but as long as the lights were lit, we could make as much noise as we wanted. I felt like it was Halloween, and we were being a bit bad, making light-hearted trouble. It is almost Halloween, Diary. We are about 15 days away. I wonder if something absolutely horrible is going to happen on Halloween. This seems to be a sort of Halloween adventure. Our plan was, of course, to shock Wrath into coming outside to see what was going on. And he would, of course. When you think you are the only human alone on a world, any sound of shouts and singing, especially when the lights are lit and you know it's not the Whiskelets, well, you're going to venture forth and find out what's going on. You're desperate to see someone. I knew that Wrath would come out to see us, like we were Christmas carolers. I also knew that he'd hear us. The cave was so quiet and echoing, he would probably hear us from the opposite end. We had walked for about 5 minutes, and I was quite honestly having fun. I wondered if we'd get lucky, and Wrath would still be in this district, and he'd hear us and come running, and right around the next corner we'd see him. We walked around the next corner, and we saw him. Wrath was standing right there. But I was simultaneously mesmerized and horrified, because he was no longer a puppet. I put my hand to my mouth. The rest of the group stopped singing as well, and we slowly shuffled to a halt. Wrath was about 30 yards ahead of us, and difficult to see clearly. It was so plainly him, however. He was dressed in a nice suit of a few years prior, not his wild red and black coat. His hair was neatly combed. His eyes were huge and sad, but mostly dull. I had just met the human Wrath a few hours before in Mara's parlor, but I was shocked all over again to see him in his human state, without the furry eyelashes and the wooden face. It was mesmerizing to see Wrath in his human state, but it was also horrifying. It meant that he had undergone some kind of transformation. The only thing I could think of was that he had agreed to become a Whiskelet. Why he was not wearing the plague mask I didn't know, but this was not Wrath as I'd met him last. He had been changed, and the only people in this world with the power to change someone were Whiskelets. I found myself becoming sad. It had been my job, ultimately, to free Wrath. I had attempted to reverse the curse, the wooden features on Don Mamungus. So far we had no idea if it had worked or would have worked, but it had been my hope to restore the flesh and blood to Wrath and erase what had been done to him, both physically and psychologically, with a wish. Now I saw that it had already been done, and it had been done by creatures with dark, wicked power. More power than I had. And, I believed, it had been done at a cost. I left the group and I ran closer to Wrath. "Wrath!" I called out. "What happened?" He turned his head slowly, almost mechanically, towards me. He stared at me out of dull eyes. I felt like I was meeting Wrath's younger brother, not his true self, because this person looked much too clean and neat and new to be the Wrath I knew. He didn't speak or change expression. Heaving for breath, I stopped in front of him and said, "Wrath, what did the Whiskelets do? How are you human now?" He stared at me. "Wrath," I said. The rest of the group came up behind me. I sensed them each give each other nervous glances behind my back. "Wrath, say something to me," I said. "What happened?" He didn't move. I suddenly had a flash of insight. I reached out and grabbed hold of his wrist. Once again, my fingers sank into soft, strange flesh. This wasn't Wrath. This was one of those things. It had been created in his image, but in the image of Hester Rathbone, not in the image of Wrath the Mad. "It's not him," I said to the others. I let go of the thing's wrist. "This isn't Wrath. This is that thing that I found in the graveyard." "Graveyard?" Noble said. I opened my mouth. I suddenly realized that I hadn't told any of them. Noble's predicament had driven everything else from my mind. I explained how I'd seen Don Mamungus' doppelganger, and how she'd teleported away from me, impossible to chase after. "But what is it?" Octavia said. The Wrath lookalike continued to stare at us. We stared back. There was something off about its skin. Sort of sallow and puffed. "You've never seen anything like it before," I said. "I was hoping one of you would know what it is." "Maybe it's an evil omen," Ariana said softly. We stared. Noble cleared his throat. "Ariana," I said, "is this some kind of night enthusiast trick that we don't know about? Have you seen anything like this before?" Ariana shook her head slowly. "It could be a night enthusiast's accomplishment. They murder and rip at souls because it brings them more power. So they might have been able to do something like this. The pawn shop people certainly would not have been able to. You have to do dark things to get power like this." She stepped forward and peered at the thing, like it was a stuffed specimen at the zoo. "I wonder what the point of it is. What does it do?" "I have no idea," I said. But I found it funny that it was modeled after Hester and not Wrath. Don Mamungus' doppelganger had simply looked like Don Mamungus. But this doppelganger, I felt, was some kind of clue. There was a difference between this and the current man. "Is it an evil omen?" Octavia said. "I doubt it," I said. "I think it's more of a clue." All of a sudden, the thing moved away from us. It jerked, ever so slightly, and then stood still. "What's it doing?" Noble said. The thing looked confused. It shifted 2 inches to the left, jerked slightly, and then looked, if possible, even a little perturbed. It moved again. Twitch. Twitch. "I think. Oh, my stars," I said. "Great Jehoshaphat, merciful heavens, my giddy aunt!" "Have you quite finished, Maud?" Ariana said. "He's trying to teleport," I said. The group paused as this sank in. I stared at the thing in fascination. I hadn't been able to study the Don Momungus doppelganger because it had run away from me. This one had somehow ended up in the Whiskelet's world, but it could not get out of it. "It's trapped here with us," I said. "That means we can keep it long enough to learn what it is," Noble said. "Yes," Octavia said, "but how?" "It does look a bit cadaverous," Ariana said. "Maybe you can just cut it open." I cocked my head. Ariana, if I wasn't mistaken, was just trying to make Octavia squirm, but she had a point. I didn't want to hurt this thing. I didn't know what the ethics of that were, but we had no idea what it was. It could have been made out of whipped cream. Metal. We could open its veins to find a glittering dust of magic symbols. Knowing more about it would not be a bad thing. "I do happen to have a medical bag," Scotland said. "You're actually going to cut it open," Noble said. "I'm not going to cut out its heart," Scotland said, "but there are delicate tests I can do, most of them non-invasive, to determine what it is. Check its eyes, its saliva, pulse, skin, hair. Is this man-made? Does it reek of magic? Is it something else?" Noble seemed twitchy. He glanced to the left. "Do we have time for this?" I sighed. Wrath was the top priority right now. We didn't know what kind of danger he was in. Seeing this thing, thinking it was Wrath, already beyond hope, it had put me on edge. I was starting to feel sick and suspicious, and I desperately wanted to just find Wrath and get out of here. However, once we found Wrath, we would have to leave at once. We didn't know if he would come willingly. We would need to get off the Whiskelet world before he had a chance to fight us and run off. Since I couldn't think of a single way to get this doppelganger off-world with us, leaving Maskwell, the underground city, meant leaving the doppelganger behind. "It won't be able to use a murder object," I said, "the thing. It won't be able to use one. You have to willingly teleport into one, and I don't know if it would know how." "We could try it," Noble said. Scotland held up her finger. No, not yet. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. We don't want to see if we can use the back door, only to watch it go loping off into the distance." "My point is," I said, "even if it can come with us, as soon as we teleport out, it's going to teleport somewhere else. It's going to get away from us. The only place we can study it is here in the Whiskelet world. We have to study it before we find Wrath. Once we find Wrath, we have to run." Noble still looked perturbed. "How long will it take, do you think?" "Oh, a minute or two," Scotland said. "I can take samples. We should get it into a house somewhere, though. Maybe it will sit down willingly in a chair." "I doubt it," Noble said. We realized that if we hemmed the thing in and walked slowly in a general direction, we could herd the doppelganger wherever we wanted. We took it towards the closest house, a large tower with a bright blue door and crooked windows. The lights were on inside. That wasn't unusual, because all the lights were lit throughout the city, but for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow whisk across the window pane. I told myself I was just imagining things. Scotland stepped up to the door and snapped open her medical bag. "I think this will be brief," she said. "Noble, will you come in last, in case our friend here wishes to run?" But before Noble could answer, the door whisked open. Someone was inside the house. Someone was already here. We looked towards the doorway, and we were greeted by the huge, staring eyes of a plague mask. We hope you've enjoyed Season 3, Episode 8, Mice in a Jar, of McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop is written and performed by Minerva Sweeney Wren, all rights reserved. Listeners, we know that it is not an easy world for people who love poetry. There you are, walking along, your nose dipping through the verse of Tennyson, when all of a sudden you run into a pole. It is a dangerous world when you have something interesting in your brain. The solution to this problem is, of course, a pair of boots that... Hang on. Are you hearing an advertisement right now for pole maneuvering boots? You are not. Do you know why? Because this podcast is free and always will be, and this podcast is advertisement free and always will be. However, there is a unique opportunity awaiting you if you become a $1 patron. Minerva Sweeney Wren hopes to start a second podcast called The Dark and Decrepit Planet of Spin, where instead of merely listening each week, you will solve real puzzles and make real choices that determine the outcome of the tale. Think of it as an enormous collaborative storytelling adventure. For more information, please go to patreon.com/SweeneyWren. Please consider sharing this podcast with your friends. A post on the audiodrama subreddit, an in-person recommendation, or a social media share do more to market this podcast than anything Minerva Sweeney Wren can do on her own. She relies on you. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop will continue with Season 3, Episode 9. The Plague Mask Speaks.